Allegations against Standard Chartered for sanctions-busting dealings with Iran have more than just investors worried. Our own Rob Cox picked up a little scoop last night with the Fed. Apparently, has a little concern.
Well, the Fed, of course, has a bunch of mandates, but one of them is to be the macro-prudential regulator of the banking system. That is, they don't want anything that might cause a bank to fail, to create any systemic risk. And so, one of the things they've done is they're checking in with Standard Chartered's New York office every few hours, probably about every 3 hours, to do sort of a liquidity check. Basically, that means they call in and say, you know, how are your customer deposits?
But they weren't originally involved. I mean, this is purely the New York regulator that has brought these allegations against.
Well, the Fed, I think, was involved in a broader investigation, which the New York guys.
The Fed was involved along with the Treasury and the New York State. So what's happened is the New York State, the threat of a revocation of the bank license has got the Fed worried that people or customers or deposits will flee the New York branch of Standard Chartered.
That's a pretty big accusation to throw out there, right?
Yeah.
Or threat to throw out there.
You mean the threat of taking away your license?
The bank license.
Yeah.
That's basically saying
It hasn't happened. It's only happened like maybe once before in recent memory with Daiwa in Japan.
I remember a state banking regulator up there in Albany working for Governor Andrew Cuomo is probably not someone we heard of a week or two ago. Now we all know his name. Everyone on Wall Street knows his name. So you know, but his concerns aren't necessarily systemic risk. Those are the concerns of the Federal Reserve. That's why the alarm bells went ringing there, and that's why they donned their macro-prudential jumpsuits and have gone into Standard Chartered.
I mean, people in the US have probably hardly heard of Standard Chartered. So, but this is a bank which, unfortunately for them, given what the Lawski is saying, has, what, 230 billion of clearing in US dollars per day.
It's the seventh largest clearer of US assets.
So that's one of the worries. It's not necessarily whether the bank ceases
now, remind you,
itself. It's not, that might not have a systemic effect.
JP Morgan clears $3 trillion a day. I mean, there are a bunch of other players out there who could soak up that.
Why is this? I mean, why is this different in the sense that you would assume that the Fed, as a macroprudential regulator, is normally checking in with banks all the time? What's particular about this case?
Well, they don't do a 3-hourly check on liquidity of banks unless they're worried that there's some trigger point where the bank's liquidity could be a problem. By the way, that's not the suggestion. No, I mean, from my understanding, there's not a whole bunch of customer assets fleeing. There's none of that. But they just want to make sure. They want to make sure. But it highlights the sort of degree to which regulators might be working at cross purposes here. So a state regulator comes in and threatens the very business of a bank branch here in New York, which then requires the Fed to jump in, again, put on its flame retardant financial firefighting suit and make sure that everything's fine.
And not to mention the fact that you have the UK sort of rallying around Standard Chartered. You have this sort of retrenchment. Standard Chartered's dug in its
heels. It's a question of
global
repercussions. Very sort of around the houses said, well, look, we'd rather regulators play ball together rather than get
and it's a question of proportionality. I mean, that seems to be the main argument where I think that the Brits have some truck. I mean, to say that, hold on here, to threaten this bank's ability to do business for customers over what is relatively. I mean, if it's 14 million, and it's
Standard Chartered is claiming. So anyway, we'll leave it there. We will keep an eye on Standard Chartered and be back with more breaking views tomorrow.